next question to you gentlemen is, are you open to advice and input from citizens or groups as the NAACP?
Absolutely, I am. The one thing that I would say is I don't think it's appropriate for me to discuss with really any group an individual pending case. But to talk about broad policies, absolutely. My door is open, and I think I proved that by meeting with the NAACP and other organizations regularly during my term. I continue to do so during the second term.
Absolutely. I think you have to be open-minded and listen to any group that has relevant information, as long as it's not on a pending case. It's never appropriate to hear from a third party that's on a pending case. That's not how the system is set up to work, and it shouldn't work that way. But I absolutely agree that you have to have a very strong tie with all groups in your community, the NAACP, any other group that is active in your community and willing to come forth and talk to you about policies and procedures and suggestions of better ways that you can possibly serve different areas of the community.
We'll start with Mr. Ballard on this one. What are your objectives for resolving crimes made against children?
Our objective is always to protect the child. We work closely with law enforcement on those cases. We work closely with the Department of Family and Children's Services on those cases. And we evaluate the case, and when it's appropriate to do so, and that's generally going to be the case, we prosecute aggressively. Every case is an individual case. Every case brings facts to the table that have to be taken into consideration. And like I said earlier, you're always looking at what the likelihood of a conviction would be. But if we're not going to protect the children, nobody will.
Yeah. You have to aggressively prosecute crimes against children. Our most precious resource that we have in this country are our children. I mean, they're our future leaders of tomorrow. They're the people that we're going to rely on to lead this country into the next generation and the years to come. We've absolutely got to protect them, and you have to do that. And one of the things that's important to remember about child molestation and child abuse, oftentimes the only witness you have is the child, and you have got to take that seriously. You've got to be able to listen to the child, and I think I have a proven track record in doing just that. There are times where I have prosecuted cases involving child abuse, child molestation, where the only evidence was the word of the child, and have been very successful in doing that over the years. You have got to reshape the way that the community thinks of children, and everybody's got to be involved in protecting children.
How do you propose to balance toughness in enforcing the law and flexibility for using common judgment in critical cases?
You faded out there on the own.
How do you propose to balance toughness in enforcing the law and flexibility for using common judgment in critical cases?
Well, that's like I talked about earlier. One of the greatest things you have as a prosecutor is your discretion. You have got to have aggressive guidelines, and you've got to be willing to prosecute crime aggressively, which I think, again, my history has proven that. But there's a thing called common sense. And, first and foremost, when you're a prosecutor, you take an oath to seek justice, not to get convictions, not to lock people up for life. Sometimes that happens. But your oath is to seek justice. Sometimes justice dictates that you try a case whether or not you think you can get a conviction, because you just have to support the family, you have to support the public policy, you have to support the victim's right. You've got to always fall back on what your oath as a prosecutor is, which is to seek justice. You've got to temper that with common sense, and you've got to look and fashion, again, like I said earlier, you've got to fashion the best possible recommendation for each case individually.
Thank you very much.
Anytime I sit in a group and I look around, I see people, and it weighs on me the responsibility that at some point, if they're victims of crime, we're responsible for taking care of them. The number one concern in any prosecution always needs to be the protection of the public. When you are doing that, you want to be fair, but you always have to remember that you're trying to protect the public. So concerns about the way that you would treat the defendant always depend on how you think the public would be affected by that treatment. So a first-time offender who shows no indication that they're going to continue to repeat their problems, you would treat differently and more leniently probably than you would somebody who just doesn't get the message and keeps committing crimes over and over and over again, putting the public at risk. The nature of the crime is going to have a lot to do with your decision as well. Somebody who is a shoplifter may not be the same threat to the community as a burglar or an armed robber, or certainly an aggravated assault offender.
Thank you.
We'll start with Mr. Hayes on this one. What qualities do you bring into law enforcement to help prevent biases and corruption?
To prevent biases and corruption?
Yes, sir.
The training, education, leadership, and 12 and a half years of experience as a prosecutor. You know, what I have consistently done my entire career as a prosecutor is educate law enforcement, work with law enforcement, and make sure that everybody involved in working with me and for me is aware of you know, sensitive issues that affect different parts of the community. I mean, you have to be progressive, you have to be inclusive of all people in your community, and you can only do that through education of law enforcement, education of prosecutors, education of victim advocates. Everyone on the staff and everybody in the community that the district attorney comes into contact with has got to be a part of the education process and continuing to push forward so that we are all included and united and as one community.
I keep coming back to it, but when you're prosecuting cases, it's really all about juries. And you're not going to be successful prosecuting any case if bias and corruption is part of the prosecution. So there is no interest whatsoever in the district attorney's office to proceed with a case where there's bias and corruption. It needs to be discouraged at every level. I've got to say, though, I've not encountered any corruption and very little bias during the time that I've been district attorney in evaluation of cases. When we see it, it does affect our decision, and generally we're not going to be as anxious to take that case to a jury because we know a jury's not going to put up with it. We don't either.